I do not want to cause any drama in the workplace. I will just do the extra work myself so nobody gets mad. I cannot fire him right now, I would feel too guilty. I just want to be a leader that everybody loves. Listen to the pathetic, whimpering language of the modern chronic people pleaser. You disguise your absolute cowardice as moral superiority. You tell yourself that you are being compassionate, that you are being empathetic, and that you are being a good person. You are entirely delusional. Notice the specific trick your mind is playing on you here, because it is more sophisticated than simple fear. Fear alone would be honest. What you have actually built is a moral costume for fear, one convincing enough that you have started to believe it yourself. You have taken the single, most self-protective behavior available to a conflict-averse nervous system, avoiding confrontation at all costs, and rebranded it as a virtue. This is why it is so difficult to talk you out of it. Nobody defends their cowardice directly, but almost everyone will defend, to the death, their kindness, even when that kindness has never once cost them anything, and has instead cost everyone around them dearly. There is a specific test that separates real kindness from this costume, and it is worth applying honestly before you decide which one you are actually practicing. Real kindness costs a person practicing it something real: time, comfort, the risk of being disliked in the short term for the sake of someone's genuine long-term benefit. The costume version costs the practitioner almost nothing at all, and quietly transfers the entire cost onto everyone downstream of the avoided conversation. The team member who never gets honest feedback and is blindsided by a termination they had no warning was coming. The friend who never learns their behavior is a problem until the relationship is already ended. The business that slowly bleeds out because nobody with authority was willing to say the uncomfortable thing early enough to matter. If your kindness has never once cost you anything, it was very likely never kindness in the first place. You are not being kind. You are simply terrified of conflict. You are paralyzed by the fear of being disliked. You let toxic employees drain your business. You let disrespectful friends cross your boundaries, and you let the world walk all over you because you are physically incapable of looking another human being in the eye and saying the word no. You believe that if you are just nice enough, the world will eventually reward you. You think you can build an empire while keeping your hands completely clean. But the reality of human nature is cold and unforgiving. Kindness without fangs is not a virtue. It is an invitation for absolute slaughter. When you refuse to be the villain in someone else's story, you guarantee the destruction of your own. Look closely at how this belief actually gets tested in practice, because it rarely gets tested all at once. It erodes in small increments, each one individually forgivable. Someone takes credit for your work in a meeting, and you let it go because raising it would feel petty. A friend cancels on you for the 5th time with no real apology, and you say it's fine because you don't want to seem needy. A client pushes your deadline, then pushes it again, then asks for extra work at the original price, and you agree each time because the relationship matters more than the money, until one day you notice the relationship has quietly become entirely one-directional, and you have no memory of the specific moment you agreed to that arrangement. Nobody sits you down and asks you to accept this treatment as a package. You simply say yes to it one small request at a time, and each individual yes felt, in the moment, like the reasonable, agreeable thing to do. To understand the brutal architecture of true power, we must travel to the blistering heat of ancient India, 300 years before the birth of Christ. We must study a man whose political philosophy makes European strategists look like naive children by comparison. His name was Chanakya. He was not a warrior with a sword. He was a scholar, an economist, and the most terrifying political mastermind of the ancient world. A man whose weapons were patience, information, and an absolute refusal to ever mistake being liked for being effective. It is worth sitting with exactly how ordinary his starting position was, because the empire he eventually built was not handed to him by birthright or army. Chanakya lived during the reign of the Nanda dynasty, a corrupt and arrogant regime that controlled the most powerful kingdom on the subcontinent at the time. He arrived at their court as, by most accounts, a scholar seeking a legitimate role in governance. Someone who believed, at least initially, that competence and reasoned counsel would be enough to earn a seat at the table. One day, the king of Nanda publicly insulted Chanakya in front of the entire court, humiliating him specifically for his physical appearance, and threw him out. If a modern man were humiliated like this, he would cry about the injustice, seek validation from friends, or try to take the high road to prove to everyone watching that he was the bigger person. He would perform his own dignity for an audience, and the performance would end there. Chanakya did not take the high road. He untied the traditional knot in his hair, a symbolic act carrying real social weight at the time, and swore an oath in front of witnesses that he would never tie it back until the entire Nanda dynasty was completely wiped from the face of the earth. This was not a metaphor he intended loosely. It became the organizing principle of the next several decades of his life. He did not raise an army of his own, because he had none, no title, and no throne to command one. Instead, he found a young, exiled boy named Chandragupta Maurya, living on the margins with no obvious claim to power. Chanakya recognized in him something the boy himself likely did not yet see clearly, and over years, not weeks, he molded that boy's mind with total deliberateness. He taught him the ruthless mechanics of war, espionage, taxation, and cold statecraft, all of it eventually compiled into a body of political theory so complete that it still gets studied today. Through sheer psychological manipulation, strategic assassinations, carefully placed spies inside the Nanda court itself, and brilliant political maneuvering that took years to fully unfold, Chanakya systematically dismantled the Nanda dynasty piece by piece, placed Chandragupta on the throne, and built the Mauryan Empire, the largest and most powerful empire in the history of the Indian subcontinent, stretching across territory that would take modern nations centuries to even attempt to unify again. It is worth pausing on how patient this entire campaign actually was, because patience is not the trait most people associate with ruthlessness, and the combination is precisely what made him so dangerous. A man motivated purely by wounded pride tends to act quickly and sloppily, looking for the fastest possible revenge. Chanakya did the opposite. He spent years building an asset, a young, capable, loyal protege, before he ever moved directly against the regime that had humiliated him, and he spent further years placing informants and cultivating discontent inside the Nanda court itself, long before any of it visibly paid off. This is the part of his story that the modern retelling tends to compress into a single dramatic sentence, when in reality, it represents the single hardest discipline the entire episode required, the willingness to absorb humiliation without reacting to it visibly, while quietly assembling, over a period of years, the actual means to end the thing that humiliated him. He documented his terrifying brilliance in a legendary treatise called the Arthashastra, a text so unflinching in its practical assessment of power that later readers across centuries have alternately called it a masterpiece of statecraft and a manual for tyranny, often in the same sentence. In this book, Chanakya laid down a fundamental law of power that completely destroys the modern, nice guy mentality. He stated, in language that has been translated and retranslated for over 2,000 years without losing its edge, that a king who tries to please everyone will inevitably lose his kingdom. A leader cannot govern through universal love, because universal love is not a real state any ruler can actually achieve. It is a fantasy that costs him every difficult decision he avoids making in pursuit of it. He must govern instead through a perfectly calculated balance of respect and controlled fear. Chanakya understood that human beings are fundamentally driven by self-interest, and he refused to pretend otherwise for the sake of sounding more palatable. If you give them endless grace with no corresponding boundary, they will not respect your kindness. They will accurately identify it as an absence of consequence, and they will exploit it, not necessarily out of malice, but simply because that is what unlimited grace teaches a rational actor to do. He taught that a ruler must be like a serpent. You do not need to bite everyone, and a wise ruler rarely does. But you must make absolutely certain that everyone around you knows, without needing to be told directly, that you possess lethal venom and the willingness to use it. It is worth understanding why the serpent, specifically, was his chosen image, rather than something louder, like a lion or a storm. A lion announces itself before it strikes. Its size and roar are themselves a warning most creatures respond to at a distance. A serpent's power lies almost entirely in the fact that its danger is understood without ever needing to be demonstrated loudly. Nobody needs to see a snake bite something to respect the possibility that it could. That quiet, undemonstrated capacity is precisely the quality Chanakya wanted in a ruler, and it is precisely the quality the chronic people-pleaser has trained away in himself so thoroughly that even his allies have stopped believing the capacity exists at all. Chanakya famously warned that in the forest, the straightest trees are always the very first to be cut down, because their very predictability makes them the easiest target for anyone with an axe and a plan. By trying to be the perfectly accommodating, perfectly honest, non-confrontational man, you are making yourself the straightest tree in the jungle. You are not being humble. You are begging for the axe, and eventually someone in your life will pick it up, because you have spent years teaching them exactly where to swing. Look at your exhausting, frustrating life. You are carrying the dead weight of incompetent people because you do not have the spine to tell them they are failing. You negotiate against your own interests before you even enter the room, pre-conceding points nobody has asked you to concede, simply to preempt a conflict that might never have happened. You smile and nod at people who blatantly disrespect you, simply because you have convinced yourself that keeping the peace is more important than keeping your dignity. Watch yourself the next time you catch this pattern in real time, because it usually happens faster than conscious thought. Someone makes a request that costs you something you did not budget for, your time, your money, your evening. Before you have even finished processing what was asked, the word sure or no problem is already halfway out of your mouth, arriving faster than any actual weighing of whether you wanted to say yes. That speed is the tell. Genuine willingness usually takes at least a moment to arrive, because it involves an actual, if brief, consideration of cost against benefit. Reflexive compliance skips that step entirely because the goal was never to weigh the request. The goal was to end the momentary discomfort of being asked as quickly as possible, regardless of what saying yes will actually cost you later. There is a specific psychological pattern underneath this behavior, and it deserves to be named with more precision than "you're just a pushover." What you are describing is a chronic, low-grade activation of the same threat response that governs physical danger, except triggered by the prospect of someone's disapproval instead of someone's fist. For a person with a strongly developed conflict-avoidant pattern, the anticipated discomfort of a difficult conversation registers, at a physiological level, as genuinely threatening, not metaphorically, but through measurable increases in heart rate and cortisol in the moments leading up to confrontation. The brain, doing exactly what brains are built to do, looks for the fastest route back to safety. Compliance is almost always the fastest route. Every time you choose it, the pattern gets reinforced a little further, and the threshold for what counts as worth the discomfort of confronting quietly rises until you find yourself accepting treatment that the version of you from 5 years ago would never have tolerated. This pattern typically traces back further than most people are willing to examine, often into childhood environments where expressing disagreement carried real, disproportionate cost. A household where a parent's mood swung unpredictably, where conflict meant genuine danger rather than a manageable disagreement, where the safest available strategy really was to stay quiet, stay agreeable, and avoid becoming a target. That strategy may have been the correct one at the time, given the actual power imbalance a child faces against an adult. The trouble is that the nervous system rarely updates the strategy automatically once the actual danger has disappeared. It keeps running the same threat calculation into adulthood, against people who hold none of the power an unpredictable parent once held, long after the original justification for the strategy has expired. You are not weak for having developed this pattern. You are, in most cases, simply running a program that made excellent sense in an environment you no longer live in. You think you are keeping the peace, but peace at the cost of your self-respect is not peace. It is absolute submission, dressed in language soft enough that you can tell yourself a more flattering story about it. When you refuse to enforce your boundaries, you teach the world exactly how to treat you, one small concession at a time, because behavior that goes uncorrected is behavior that has been implicitly approved. Your employees do not work hard for a boss they can easily manipulate. Your competitors do not fear a man who is desperate for a compromise before the negotiation has even started. And the people you are trying so hard to please will very often be the first ones to abandon you the moment your empire begins to crack, precisely because your relationship with them was never built on respect in the first place. It was built on their comfort, subsidized entirely by your discomfort. This dynamic tends to become visible only in retrospect, which is exactly what makes it so dangerous while it is happening. In the moment, every individual accommodation feels like evidence of a good relationship. See how well we get along, see how little friction there is between us. What that absence of friction is actually measuring in a huge number of cases is simply how completely one side has stopped asking for anything the other side might refuse. A relationship with zero visible conflict is not automatically a healthy one. It is sometimes simply a relationship where one party has learned, through repeated experience, that their preferences do not need to be considered, because the other party will accommodate regardless. Picture two managers, each inheriting a team with one employee who is quietly, consistently underperforming, dragging down morale and covering for it charmingly enough that it has gone unaddressed for months. The first manager notices the problem within the first 2 weeks and decides to handle it kindly. He gives soft, indirect feedback wrapped in so much cushioning that the actual message never lands. He picks up the slack himself on tight deadlines rather than confront the pattern directly, telling himself he is being a supportive leader. 6 months pass. The underperforming employee has not changed because nothing has actually been communicated to him with enough clarity to require change. The rest of the team, however, has noticed everything. They have watched their manager quietly absorb the cost of one person's failure rather than address it, and they have drawn the entirely rational conclusion that consistent effort is optional as long as you're likable enough. 2 of his strongest performers, the ones who could easily find work elsewhere, begin quietly interviewing, not because the company is failing, but because they no longer believe competence is actually valued here. The manager spends his nights exhausted, resentful, and confused about why his kindness has produced a team that seems to respect him less with each passing month. The second manager notices the same problem in the same first 2 weeks and has one direct, uncomfortable, specific conversation about it almost immediately. It costs her a genuinely unpleasant afternoon. The employee is defensive, possibly upset, and the air in the room is tense for the rest of the day. She does not apologize for the standard, only for anything in her own communication that was unclear. Within a month, the employee has either corrected course, having been given something concrete to correct, or the mismatch has become undeniable enough that a clean, decisive exit becomes the obviously right call for everyone involved, including him. Either outcome resolves the actual problem within weeks rather than letting it fester for 2 quarters. Her remaining team members notice the standard being enforced, and their own effort recalibrates upward to match it without her ever needing to say a single word to them directly about it. 6 months later, her team's output has measurably improved, and counterintuitively, she is more liked by the people who remained than the first manager is by his, because respect, once actually observed rather than merely hoped for, produces a far more durable form of loyalty than comfort ever does. Consider a third case, outside the workplace entirely, because the exact same mechanism governs personal relationships with equal precision. 2 friends, at roughly the same point in adulthood, each have a close friend who consistently borrows money and is consistently slow, vague, or forgetful about repaying it. The first friend says nothing directly about it for over 2 years, quietly keeping a mental tally, growing more resentful with every unreturned loan, while still agreeing every time the request comes in, because refusing feels like it would damage a friendship he genuinely values. The resentment eventually reaches a point where he explodes over an unrelated minor disagreement, the accumulated frustration of 2 years coming out sideways and disproportionately, damaging the friendship far more severely than a single direct conversation about money ever would have. The second friend, faced with the identical pattern from her own friend, raises it directly and calmly the second time it happens, before any real resentment has had time to accumulate, stating plainly what she is and is not comfortable lending going forward. The conversation is awkward for exactly 1 afternoon. The friendship, unlike the first case, survives intact for years afterward, because the boundary was stated clearly while there was still nothing but a small amount of tension to manage, rather than 2 years of buried frustration that eventually had nowhere left to go but sideways. It is worth pausing here to draw a boundary that Chanakya himself, in his own writing, was careful about, because there is a version of this lesson that curdles into simple cruelty, and that version is not what built the Mauryan Empire. The Arthashastra does not argue that a ruler should be needlessly harsh, unpredictable, or cruel for its own sake. In fact, it explicitly warns against rulers who terrorize without purpose, describing such behavior as a fast route to rebellion rather than loyalty. The venom Chanakya describes is meant to be visible in its potential, not constantly deployed. The entire strategic value of the serpent is that it rarely needs to bite anyone, because everyone already knows that it could. A leader who fires people impulsively, who manufactures conflict to prove a point, or who mistakes coldness for strength, has not learned Chanakya's lesson. He has simply found a more socially acceptable outlet for the same dysregulation the chronic people-pleaser is avoiding, just aimed outward instead of inward. The actual skill being described here is not aggression. It is the willingness to have the uncomfortable conversation exactly once, clearly, at the moment it is needed, rather than avoiding it for 6 months and then either exploding or silently seething. Directness, delivered early and calmly, is not the same thing as harshness, and confusing the two is exactly how stop being a pushover turns into an excuse for people who simply enjoy being unkind. If you want to build anything of monumental value in this life, you must get comfortable with being the villain in someone else's narrative, because someone, somewhere will always experience your first honest boundary as an attack purely because they had grown used to you having none. You must learn to look a toxic, underperforming employee in the eye and sever their income without theatrical guilt, while still doing it cleanly and with basic human respect for the difficulty of what they're hearing. You must learn to lovingly but firmly cut off parasitic relationships without a lengthy public apology tour. You must be able to stand in the middle of a room, state your terms with calm, cold finality, and be perfectly willing to let the silence sit there, unfilled, rather than rushing to soften it the way you always have before. You do not need to be a tyrant, but you must completely eradicate the pathetic need to be universally liked, because that need has been quietly running your life, your business, and your relationships from behind the curtain for far longer than you have been willing to admit. True respect is never born from compliance. It is born from the undeniable, unspoken understanding that you have the capacity to be incredibly firm, and the elite discipline to keep that firmness perfectly controlled rather than performative. You must show the world your fangs so that you rarely, if ever, actually have to use them. Start with a single, specific boundary you have been avoiding right now, not an abstract commitment to be more assertive in general, which is vague enough to quietly evaporate the moment discomfort arrives. Name the one conversation you have been postponing, decide the exact sentence you need to say, and have it this week rather than waiting for a more comfortable moment that will not arrive on its own. Chanakya did not become the serpent by deciding, in the abstract, to be more feared. He became the serpent by making one specific, irreversible decision, the oath about his hair, the choice to build Chandragupta rather than beg for readmission to the Nanda court, and then following through on the concrete implications of that decision for years afterward. Your equivalent will look smaller, and it should. It still has to be specific enough that you cannot quietly talk yourself out of it the way you've talked yourself out of every vague resolution to stop being a pushover that you have made before. Stop negotiating with disrespect before anyone has even asked you to. Stop carrying the weight of other people's incompetence as though it were your own moral obligation. Kill the nice guy. Embrace the cold, calculating clarity of real leadership. Accept the discomfort of the few who only ever liked your silence, and command the respect of everyone who is actually paying attention. And get to work.